very first 1 hour episode of Seinfeld. Two-parter, and it's a good one. One of my favorites. It's Jerry's, either his personal favorite or one of his personal favorites. And definitely one of the best in the series. Such a good episode, The Boyfriend. Well, also called The New Friend, because obviously Larry David said in the Inside Look that the whole premise of this kind of was like the opposite of back in season 1. They did the episode Male Unbonding, when they told a story about how to get rid of a guy that you don't want to be friends with anymore. But again, like, it was a story where it's like, they were treating it like it was an actual, like, couple that was in love breaking up, to make the humor out of it. Now, of course, we're doing kind of that same thing here with this episode, The Boyfriend, or New Friend, as some call it. Like, how do you make a new friend and that you really want to be friends with? But of course, it becomes awkward because it's not like you guys are dating, but it's like you're excited to see him. So obviously, with that storyline, they had to have it be like like relatable, as into like someone who was known to go along with it. So who is this guy? And of course, that guy ended up being former National League MVP Keith Hernandez, which of course surprises me and cracks me up, because yes, Keith Hernandez was Jerry's favorite player with the Mets. He's done a lot of work with the Mets, but you look at his stats and forget that Keith Hernandez actually won the MVP and probably did most of his better work in his career with the Cardinals. But he was still done a lot of stuff with the Mets and whatnot. So it ended up being Keith Hernandez, and of course Jerry was a huge fan of Keith Hernandez. Keith, though, had never heard of Seinfeld until he got asked to do this episode. Jerry even said himself he remembers, looking at my closet, like having one of those days where it's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to wear? I'm meeting Keith Hernandez today. What on earth am I supposed to wear? And of course, like everybody was just like, speechless around him and everything. Now, of course, as I said before, this is an hour episode. Originally, for it only being a half an hour, Keith only apparently had 2 scenes and very few lines. But then they got into that scenario where they had too much for a half-hour show, but they didn't quite have enough for an hour. So they had to come up with another story, and they made it an hour show, which again was the first 2-part episode in the series. So of course I'm going to split, of course, any 2-part episodes up into 2 reviews. Of course, I believe part 1 actually ended with Jerry doing an ad-lib and very funny scene with Jason Alexander, but we'll get to that in a bit. So of course, like I said, the episode starts off with Jerry meeting Keith Hernandez. It was at the health club. It was right after Kramer had left. They had just got done playing basketball, and they were blaming each other for the loss. And George, big time, they said all he does is shoots the ball. They call him a chucker. So then after Kramer leaves, Jerry and George then see a guy stretching and realize that's Keith Hernandez. It's like, should we go talk to him? What should we do? Well, Keith came over himself and introduced himself to Jerry and said that he was a huge fan of his comedy. And George is trying to, butt into the conversation that was going on between Jerry and Keith, but it's like George kept getting, brushed off. And then, Jerry was telling him where he was going to be performing at New York, and he said, we can change numbers, I'll let you know sometime when I'm doing it. He says, or we can get dinner sometime. And, and finally, George, got Keith's attention, and Keith basically goes, who is this Chuck? Referring to, again, how he called him being a chucker. So then, but then, of course, it was 3 days later, and Keith hadn't called Jerry yet. And then Jerry's sitting there at Monk's with Elaine, freaking out, like, oh my gosh, she hasn't called me yet, why did he call me, this and that, again, just, it's a friend, it's just friends, but it's acting like he's dating. He's that excited that, oh, this friend is gonna call me, but it came across as like, they were dating, basically. So Keith didn't call him, so Elaine talks Jerry into giving him a call. And then, meanwhile, at the same time, Well, I'll stick on this end first. Now I can go to the next story. So then, meanwhile, George is trying to get an extension on his unemployment benefits, but he has to go meet with his the unemployment office lady, Mrs. Sokol, and tell her that he's been looking for work for him to get an extension. Well, obviously, he's got nothing. So he makes up some lie saying that he was close to getting a job with Vandelay Industries, again going back to Art Vandelay, and saying he was applying for a position as a latex salesman, but he's trying to change the subject and everything. But Mrs. Sokol's trying to get an address, phone number, all that stuff, because she wants to contact him and make sure, hey, he's not lying, make sure he's telling the truth. Well, George, of course, is in a pickle, so what did he do? She gave him Jerry's address and Jerry's phone number, and she said she's going to be calling as soon as she was done with him. So George was like, okay, I'll just let you go. I got a lot of work to do, and he just runs for his life. He runs to a payphone outside, and he yanks the person who's in the payphone out, and he calls Jerry. Well, at the same time, Kramer was using Jerry's phone, talking to Michael and whoever I can't remember. They're friends in the Hamptons that had the baby that had a baby, and they always going, "You gotta see the baby, you gotta see the baby," and then Jerry doesn't even care about seeing this baby at all whatsoever. But but Kramer was talking to them, so finally here's another call coming in. He switched over to George, and he basically says, "George, I'm busy, call back." And you hear one ear going, "No, no!" And he hangs up, and then he's freaking out until a police officer comes with the person who George yanked out of the phone booth. So George got booted. So then he gets into a cab, and he's basically telling the cab driver, what to do. He's telling him, switch lanes, make this light, this, and that. And the cab driver just had enough of George, and he got into a fight with him and threw him out of the cab. Oh, jeez. But, also, in the midst of all of this, as George is making his way back, Jerry did get a hold of Keith, and they were going to go out and have dinner together on, like later that night or something like that. And Jerry's, pulling out his shirts, telling Elaine, "Hey, Elaine, what do you think of this shirt?" and everything. And he's like, "Jerry, he's a guy." And then Kramer was like, "What guy? Who are you trying to impress?" And Jerry's like, "Oh, Keith Hernandez." And then he's like, "Keith Hernandez?" Then here comes Newman. He's like, "Keith Hernandez!" And then he's like, "What's wrong with Keith Hernandez?" And they tell this story. Now, here's the thing, though. Before I explain the story, which was priceless, the other big thing about this episode made it so famous was the fact around this time was when Oliver Stone's JFK had came out, and then Tom Leopold, who was assassin buff, he was a fan of watching documentaries and whatnot of those incidents. I don't know, just somehow it came up with the idea of them doing a parody of JFK in the Seinfeld episode. Of course, also they even said when they were at the health club and they saw Keith, they said he's a Civil War buff, making reference, of course, to Tom Leopold. So they do. Well, first off, let's start from the beginning, from the story. June 14th, 1987. Kramer and Newman were at a Mets and Phillies game. Hernandez apparently made a 11-time Gold Glove winner, or however many times he won the Gold Gloves. He told Elaine in part 2. Spoiler alert there. Excuse me. He made a big error that cost the Mets to a game, opened the door to a 5-run night for the Phillies. So that happened. So they were walking down at the parking lot ramp by the players' lot. Hernandez was coming past them, and as they passed him, Newman turned and said, "Nice game, pretty boy." And then Hernandez had turned around to say something, but then a couple seconds later, Kramer was spit on. And I love how Kramer describes that you can't even, here's the thing, you can't even see Kramer's emotions, but they're still showing the flashback scenes, that was shot like and has the look of like the JFK film, which again they basically had to change the exposure settings and whatnot, make it look like more like an old timer, like like projector film, and like rub the film on the floor, get it dirty and whatnot, just so make it look like it was a 60s moment when it really was an 80s moment, of course. But I like how Kramer was off camera. Like, before the last shot, you see him, he looks like he's all serious and whatnot. And then he says, and I just screamed out, I'm it! And then, of course, Newman had turned to check on Kramer, and the spit had somehow ricocheted off Kramer and hit Newman. It's like spit, like a little piece of water just has that much of effect that it just nails. Okay, yes, definitely nailing Kramer in the eye if I was open would definitely be painful, but the spit apparently hits Newman on the rib and the hand, then bounces on the hand in front of drop his baseball cap and hits him in the left thigh. So Jerry though says no, I'm gonna point something out here. So they describe the story. And again, he uses Kramer's golf club to, animate, the spit. But then after explaining it, there's this long scene that Jerry was definitely glad to get through. So it was, it got a lot of laughs. And as one of the Castle Rock executives said, like, again, Seinfeld at times played a lot with dark humor. Like, they took, like, something like a tragedy, like like the JFK episode, or even the pony remark whenever Manya had died the day after Jerry made that rude remark about the pony remark. Everybody's joking that Jerry killed her and whatnot. Like, there's some like dark moments that somehow they were able to turn them into a comedy. Even though it's supposed to be like a dark moment, they were able to still make humor out of it without being insulting. Which is when, especially with this whole JFK, flashback, reenactment, trying to, do like a parody of that, was a success as far as that goes. Which would really brought Seinfeld to a whole other level. And of course, the door being open for, doing future 1-hour episodes as well. Jerry, though, has this long speech, explaining, the story, and using the golf club to be, to show, where, the spit, will be hitting and the direction they're coming from. But then the actor, he points out, which is him trying to prove that Hernandez was innocent and not the one who did this. He asked Kramer, what happened to your head when you got hit with the spit? Kramer said his head went back and to the left. Jerry's saying that if Hernandez was the one who spit on you, it couldn't have been Hernandez because the spit could not have come from behind. Because the way he's describing it, there had to have been a second spitter, and the only place he could have been was behind the bushes over on the gravelly road. Had Hernandez spit on him, since he had already walked past them when he was behind them at the time, if he was spit on him, Kramer's head, even though I don't know how it would have been like that strong of a as Jerry described, of a magic loogie, it would have caused Kramer's head to pitch forward instead of backward. But of course, Kramer and Newman wanted nothing to do with that, so they said, "I'm leaving. Jerry's a nut." So after, of course, all of that happens, here in comes George running. After he of course just got into a fight with that cab driver. He's out of breath, and he's asking if anybody had called asking for Vandalay Industries. So then he explains what happened. He was at the unemployment office, and to cover up for him to still get an extension, a 13-week extension on his unemployment benefits, he told him that he was close to getting a job with Vandalay Industries, and he gave them his address and phone number. So basically, until this gets cleared up, Jerry has to answer the phone and say that it's Vandalay Industries. And Jerry's like, well, what am I doing? You're considering hiring me for your latex salesman. He's like, I don't think so. I'm not doing that, Biff. Because he's still making the Biff Larman references, which, in part 2, a certain someone who is very known for another role, one of my other favorite sitcoms, talk about that, also called George Biff. Biff. I just love how Jerry called Biff. What's wrong, Biff? Um, but he's like, why would I do this for you? And George just goes, I asked you to. Um, so then Jerry and Keith go out, and of course they're sitting in the car, and Jerry's just like, should I shake his hand? Should I shake his hand? Come on, I'm Jerry Seinfeld. I was on the Tonight Show. So they shake hands. But earlier in the night, Jerry had brought Elaine down with him to give her a ride home. Before Jerry gets out of the car, though, Keith asks Jerry, what's the story with Elaine? And Jerry says, they used to go out there as friends now. And Keith asks, would you mind if I gave her a call? And he's like, sure, but he all at the same time seemed a little, disturbed by this. So then the next day, George was at the apartment, and he was basically asking Jerry how was his night with Keith, but asking questions like, as if it was a date, gonna see him again, did you shake his hand, this and this, like all these details that again would come across as if he went on a date, because like I said, he's excited about his new friend, but again, he's coming across like they're dating. So then when Elaine comes in, right before Jerry's about to tell a story about how he asked for Elaine's number, she came in and said how Keith called her, which of course, think about it. Keith didn't call Jerry for 3 days where Jerry called him, but he gets Elaine's number and immediately calls her. So they had made a play. Jerry and Keith had made plans before they left the night before to see JFK that Friday. Which I like how again they make references, and then they actually mention the actual reference in the movie, which is funny. But Keith had asked Elaine if they wanted to go out Saturday, but she had plans, so they're going out Friday instead. Which Jerry's like, Friday? That's our night. And basically Elaine's like, what are you jealous of here, basically? And then Keith calls and basically says, I'm sorry about it. Can we just make plans next week? Also, of course, Jerry had to answer the phones, pretending he's Vandalay Industries, but it was Keith. But he basically says it's all good. We'll do something next week. So then, Kramer can't come over. George went to the bathroom, and then Jerry went to take out the garbage. Well, Kramer and Elaine are just sitting there, silent for a couple seconds. The phone rings. Yellow? What Delay Industries? And then you hear George from the bathroom screaming out, Vandalay! Vandalay! Say Vandalay! Kramer, of course, who had no clue, about the plan in case whenever Mrs. Sokol called, basically says, this is an apartment, this is the right number, but this is an apartment, this is not what you think it is. And then George came running out of the bathroom with his pants pulled down. Well, you still see his underwear's pulled up, but his pants was pulled down, screaming at Kramer, say Vandalay Industries. And then Elaine's like trying to get attention, but Kramer's just like, just like hold on, I'm trying to concentrate here and whatnot, basically. But George comes out, obviously realizes he's doomed, and it's like slams his fist out, like, damn it, basically. And then Jerry walks right back in, and this was ad-lib. This was not in the script. He looks down and just sees George in his underwear, and he just, again, ad-libs in there, and you want to be my latex salesman. And to be continued, because that was the end of part 1. The scenes, of course, also I didn't mention. Well, in part 2 we'll talk about that story more. But the story about Keith and Elaine going out was the story that Keith said was added in to help make the episode an hour show, since originally it had too much material for a half hour. So that was the story that was added in. And I gotta guess also, because Kramer, I forgot to mention, Kramer came in before Mrs. Sokol called and asked Jerry if he wanted to go see the baby on Friday after his plans with Keith got canceled. So I'm pretty sure the baby scene got added in, may have been added in also, but who knows. But that's part 1 of one of the best episodes of Seinfeld, I gotta say, and Jerry's personal favorite, the boyfriend, the new friend, and of course guest starring Keith Hernandez, with, of course, an Oliver Stone's JFK parody. So I will see you guys in the next review, which will be part 2 of this episode. Again, I wanted to, split them up into 2, since technically even though it's an hour show, they're technically a 2-part episode. So I'll see you guys in part 2 of The Boyfriend. We're not done discussing yet the inside jokes and just the humor this episode was that just made it so good. So, also, we'll find out was it Keith Hernandez who spit on Kramer and Newman? Who was the true second spitter if it was not him? How will Jerry and Keith's friendship continue to blossom if Keith now wants to put the moves on Elaine? We'll find out next. So for now, guys, what were your thoughts on The Boyfriend Part 1? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content to come on my channel, and follow me on Twitter at DemandAirBoy93. Till then, guys, I'll see you momentarily in Part 2 of The Boyfriend. Till then, guys, I'm checking out. Have a great night. Peace out, everybody.